Hello everyone, this is Rick and today we are going to discuss about the American War of Independence, which is also known as the American Revolution. This is a time when all the liberal ideas of the world came together, and the result is that we had American Revolution and French Revolution, where people sought for independence and people sought for equality and individual rights. So we will see how the colonies in the new world, or the colonies in the present day area of America, got independence from British domination. That is called as the American Revolution. Please carry a notebook with you when you are going through this video so that you can note down the important points. Also, the last part of this video has some important question and their answers which will help you to understand this chapter better. So without doing any delay, let's get into details. So, American War of Independence. Here we will go through a background, what led to the American War of Independence. So, at first we need to understand that there was a political change in England. In the late 17th century, political developments changed the system of government in England, which means that until this time, until the late 17th century, England was being governed by a monarch, a king or a queen, and whatever the government used to do was solely based on the decision of the king or the queen. But now something changed. What was the change? Constitutional monarchy. New system called constitutional monarchy emerged, where the monarch ruled with the consent of the parliament. So here there will be a parliament. From the late 17th century, there was a change called constitutional monarchy. What was that change? A parliament will be there where people will be elected as representatives of the people. So all the citizens of England will elect their representatives, and they will rule over the country. They will decide what the government will do, and the king will have to agree to it. So role of parliament. Parliament became the representative body of the people. Means people will elect their representatives. Limited power of the monarch. So now under this system, the monarch no longer enjoyed unlimited power. So monarch or the king or queen cannot do whatever he or she wants. The king or the queen will have to go according to the guidance of the parliament, which is a representative body. Enlightenment philosophers. So there were many philosophers, and they had a lot of very good new ideas. So who were the philosophers? John Locke, Rousseau, Voltaire, Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine wrote about freedom. So these were the people who were vouching against the monarchy, who were vouching or who were advising people for individual freedom. Focus on rights and liberty. They highlighted individual freedom, rights against injustice, and right to political independence. So they made the people understand that you have certain rights which you are supposed to enjoy. The king should not do whatever he or she wants. People are not to be downtrodden. So this was the main focus of the philosophers, where they focused on rights and liberty. Spread of democratic ideas. Their writings began to spread democratic ideas widely. Democracy means power of the people and power for the people. So people are the main entities in a state. That idea was instilled on the people by the philosophers. Global impact. These ideas found expression in political developments in America and France. So all these ideas became prominent in the politics of America and France. Late 18th century. These developments took place in the late 18th century. So slowly, people became aware of their rights. People became aware of their freedom, and they got a self confidence among themselves, which led to revolution. American Revolution. Now, what is American Revolution? Why did it happen and how did it happen? So, the background of America is that it was discovered by a person named Christopher Columbus in 1492. Until then, no one knew about the continent of North America and South America. Christopher Columbus found it on 1492. Voyages of Vespucci. Amerigo Vespucci made 4 voyages to America and gave a vivid description of the land. So Columbus just found the land, he discovered the route to America. However, the main exploration of America was done by a person named Amerigo Vespucci, who went to America 4 times and surveyed the land. Later on, what happened? Since it was a new land filled with new resources, there was a substantial migration of people from Britain and France to this new world. So, people from Britain and France went to this new world. There was a migration of the Europeans into the American continent, which was very newly discovered. European settlements. Europeans began making settlements in America in the 16th century. So during the 16th century, many Europeans had gone to America, they had bought new lands and they had settled there. So by 16th century, America was more or less dotted on the coastlines with European settlements. Rise of English power. Gradually, England emerged as the most dominant foreign power in America. So, gradually, England emerged as the boss. England took control of the whole region of America. Now, there were 13 colonies. By the end of 18th century, 13 English colonies were established in North America along the Atlantic coast. So along the Atlantic coast, there were 13 colonies of the English, which was established in North America. Struggle for freedom. These colonies fought a war of independence to free themselves from British control. So these colonies were being exploited by the Britishers. They were being taken advantage upon. And so these colonies declared their independence from British control. And this instance is called as American Revolution. This struggle is known as American Revolution. Historical importance. Why is it important? It was the first organized political revolution in world history that led to the birth of USA and a democratic government. So for the first time, a proper democratic government was formed in a place with the help of a organized political movement. So that is how American Revolution happened. Now, what were the causes of American Revolution? The first cause is economic exploitation. Means economically, American people were being taken as as subsidiaries of the England government, and they were harassed economically. How were these harassments? So, British colonial policy. The colonial policy of England in economic matters was the primary cause of resentment in the American colonies. So now the American colonies are under the British Empire, and the Britishers had the sole purpose of extracting or to take or to loot resources from the colonies, and that led to problems. Limited economic freedom. The British colonies in America had liberty in local affairs, but Britain kept a tight control on economic policies. So locally, the American people could do whatever they want within their own territory only. However, if they wanted to trade or to do business internationally, then that was being controlled by the British Empire. America as a resource hub. So America was a newly discovered continent, and so America was looked upon as a market and a source of raw materials. Raw materials were taken from America, they were made into finished products in Britain, and then again those finished products were sold in America. So thus America were acted both as a market and a source of raw material. Either way, they were being extracted, they were being looted. So export to England only. And if some American person wanted to sell something to other country, to any other country other than England, then they were not permitted. So it was laid down that goods like sugar, tobacco, cotton and indigo could be exported only to England. Even if suppose France is paying more price than England, still the Americans could not sell anything to France. They were supposed to sell only to England. And these goods like sugar, tobacco, cotton and indigo, they were highly in demand and highly profitable. But still they had to sell it as a much at a much lesser price to England only. Heavy import duties. Heavy duties were imposed on import of goods into colonies from other places. So if some American wanted to buy something from any other country other than England, then they had to pay a lot of tax. Ban on new industries. Colonists were forbidden to start certain industries such as ironworks, woolen goods, and textiles. These are the things which the colonies were not allowed to make. So protection of British industries. These rules were meant to protect similar industries in Britain from any competition. So the Americans could not make certain products because if they make it, then they will act as a competition for the Britishers and Britishers will face loss. So that is why Americans were not allowed to do certain activities like ironworks, woolen goods and textiles. Then there was colonial discontent. Such economic exploitation led to resentment among the colonies. So because of all these reasons, the colonists became very angry with the British Empire. Then there was some political system in the colonies which were also against the dominion of Britain. So colonial governance. Each colony had its own local assembly for administration. The 13 colonies, each one had one local assembly to control its own internal functions, sorry. Elected representation. Members of these assemblies were elected by the people of the colonies. So all these assemblies had members who were elected by the people of the colonies themselves. Head of each assembly was the governor of the colony. So head of the colony was decided on who will be the head of the elected representatives, and that person was the governor of the colony. The governor was not elected by but appointed by the British government. So now the governor will not be one who has the most number of votes. The governor will be the one who is having good relationship with Britain. So British government will appoint governor of American colonies. These governors were not answerable to the elected assemblies of the colonies. So people have elected their representatives, but those representatives are having no power. All the power is vested on a person who is the governor, and that governor has been elected by Britain. So this governor was not answerable to the people of the colony. This governor could do whatever he wants and no one could ask him for any reason or answers. Partial governance. Governors ruled in favor of England, not the interests of the colonies. So it can be assumed very well that these governors have been appointed by England, so whatever they do will be for the benefit of England only. So they did not have any interest of the colonists. So no real power. Although assemblies existed where there were representatives, the colonists had no actual power in governance. So their parliament or their assembly was only an honorary thing. They did not have any actual power. Rule from the mother countries. The colonies were ruled according to the interests of England, and England never thought of how these people are living. England only thought of its own profit. This political system caused discontent and dissatisfaction among the colonies. So, when people are ruling you from outside, the people who do not care anything about your well being, then obviously you will be angry. And that same thing happened with the American colonies, which were under the governance of England. Separate identities of the colonists. So these colonies were culturally very different from the British people. So diverse settler origins. The settlers in the American colonies came from different European countries, mainly Britain. So the people who were living in America, they were not always British. Mainly they were British. Mostly the people were from Britain only. But many other countries had also sent their people in America. So there was a diverse origin for the people in the American colonies. No strong ties with England. They had no political, emotional, or cultural attachment to England. Most of them have never gone to England. They are living in America for generations. Their great grandfather may have come to America from Britain, but the present people never went to Britain or never went to England. So they had no emotional connection or cultural ties with England. Religious freedom. Most settlers have come to escape religious persecution and enjoyed religious freedom in the colonies. In England, Christianity had a very strong hold among the among its citizens. But in America, there was religious freedom. Christianity did not play a governing role in the governance of the colonies. So many settlers had come to escape from the religious conservative strategy from England. They came to America in search of a new life and new opportunities. So they came to America because they hated Britain. Now, if Britain is controlling everything in America, then obviously they will not like that. So over time, the people developed their own way of life, culture, and values. So they made their own culture. Over time, they evolved into a separate culture which did not have any such attachment with England. A new society developed which was distinct from British society. This society of the American colonies was very much different from the society of the England country. So they were proud of their identity as Americans and not as British subjects. So they did not identify themselves as British citizens, but they identified themselves as Americans, and they were very proud of their identity. They wanted the right to govern themselves and protect their interests. So now the Britishers are not thinking about the American colonists. So they had to think about themselves. So they wanted the right to govern themselves. This separate identity increasingly clashed with British control and interest. So when they are trying to be separate, they are trying to be politically and economically separate, then Britishers will have a huge loss. So Britishers will not agree to it. Then there was ideas of Jefferson and Paine. These were famous philosophers, so voice against British rule. Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine strongly opposed British rule over colonies. These were the famous intellectuals who made people understand that what the Britishers are doing is not at all good. They emphasize the right to equality and liberty for all individuals. They emphasized on the fact that every human beings are equal and they all have certain amount of freedom and they should enjoy it. So their writings focused on justice and the rights of people against all forms of injustice. So injustice will no more be tolerated. That was the teaching of Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine. They believed that people had the right to political independence from oppressive rule. According to their thoughts, people always had the right to fight for their rights or to fight for independence, especially when the rule is oppressive. They argue that government derives its power from the consent of the governed. So, according to Thomas Jefferson and Paine, government is not the owner of people. Government is on the service of the people. And so, people are the owners of the government. People are the main entities in the government. Both Jefferson and Paine promoted the idea that certain rights are natural and inalienable, means certain rights are firm, they are undisputed. People have the right to equality, people have the freedom of expression, so these things are not negotiable. Their pamphlets and essays inspired a growing demand for independence. So they published pamphlets and distributed it. They published many essays, and all of their teachings were focused on the demand for independence. Their ideas encouraged political awareness and resistance among the colonists. So, from these ideas, political awareness took place among the people, and they tried resisting the British Empire. They laid the intellectual foundation for American democracy and revolution. Now there was an incident called the Stamp Act in 1765. What was the Stamp Act? In 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act to raise revenue from the American colonies. So, this was a law made by the British Parliament in Britain to extract money from the Americans. What was the law? It required that all legal documents, newspapers, and even playing cards to carry a revenue stamp. So, everything should have an authorization from the British government, and that authorization came in the form of a revenue stamp. The act imposed an additional financial burden on the American people, and to acquire this revenue stamp you need to pay the government. Government means the British Empire. So suppose someone in America is sending something to his relative in other part of America. They are sending some letters, and both are living in America, but they will have to pay a tax to Britain for sending something within America itself. This was an absurd rule, and that was the Stamp Act of 1765. The colonists protested that they were being taxed without representation in the British Parliament. Now no one from the colony is there in the British Parliament, so a rule is being made for the people of America, and the people who are making the rule, no one is American among them. Understood? So Americans are having no say in this. Rule is being imposed from outside. No taxation without representation. This slogan became the rallying cry of the colonists against unjust British taxation. So the people in America said that if you don't allow us to be members in the functionalities of the government, then you cannot tax us. So we will not pay you unless you give us a right to say something in the functions of the government. No taxation without representation. There were widespread protests and boycotts of British goods across the colonies. So people started protesting and boycotting British goods. A Stamp Act Congress was formed in 1765 to unite the colonies in opposition. So now the colonies are also forming an union against the British government, and that was in the form of Stamp Act Congress. Due to strong resistance, the British Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. So, at last, the British government agreed to the demands of the American colonies, and they repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. The issue left deep anger and further widened the gap between the colonies and Britain. But the issue became a cause of anger for the colonies against the British government. Then there was the Boston Tea Party. What happened in Boston regarding tea boxes? So, Tea Act of 1773. The British Parliament passed the Tea Act in 1773 to help financially troubled East India Company. So, East India Company was going through a loss phase. They were having many loss in business. So, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act of 1773 in order to help the East India Company, which was a private company. So unfair trade monopoly, it allowed the company to sell tea directly in America, bypassing colonial merchants. So only East India Company could sell tea in America. The local merchants also did not have any say in it. East India Company will directly sell tea to the American people, not through the local merchants, where the local merchants could have got some profit. But here all the profit will be taken by the East India Company. So this act hurt colonial traders and was seen as another example of British exploitation. Protest against the Tea Act. In December 1773, American patriots decided to protest against the Tea Act. So American patriots, people who love America, their own citizens, they decided to protest against this Tea Act. A group of men disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians to carry out the protest. So Mohawk Indians were red Indians. They were a specific tribe of red Indians. So a group of people disguised as red Indians and went inside to carry out the protest. They boarded British ships anchored in Boston Harbor carrying tea cargo. So many British ships were there in the Boston Harbor, and they somehow managed to enter those ships. And in those ships, the content or the cargo was tea. 342 chests of tea were thrown into water by the protesters. So many boxes of tea were thrown in the water by the protesters as a protest against the Tea Act of 1773. This act of defiance came to be known as the Boston Tea Party. So this incident is called as the Boston Tea Party. It became a major turning point in the movement for American independence. So this was a major turning point for the American Revolution. Beginning of the war. How did the war began? So now it was up to this period, it was only about protests, intellectual risings, and different forms of revolts. But now actual war will start. So first Continental Congress in 1774, the representatives of the 13 colonies called the meeting of the first Continental Congress at Philadelphia. So Philadelphia was a place where all the representatives of the 13 colonies met together and formed an union called the First Continental Congress. It happened in 1774. The Congress passed the Declaration of Rights and Grievances and appealed to King George III to withdraw all unjust and oppressive acts. So the Congress came to a conclusion that what are the wrongs being done by the British government to the American people. So they made a list that these are the wrong things which are happening with us, and they sent that list to King George III of England and requested him to withdraw all those laws or all those oppressive acts which harmed the American people. It was declared that the British Parliament had no right to tax the colonies without their consent. So you cannot extract tax from the Americans if the Americans do not want it. So without agreeing with the Americans, you cannot tax the Americans. That was the decision being made in the First Continental Congress. How did the British react? The British Parliament rejected the declaration and sent troops to suppress the rebellion in Massachusetts. So, Massachusetts is a place where rebellion was going on against the British government. So, instead of agreeing to the demand, the British government wanted to show force. So they called in the army and military came to suppress the rebellion in Massachusetts. Second Continental Congress. In 1775, just the next year, the Second Continental Congress resolved to form an army under George Washington. So now the Americans became convinced that requesting the British government to do anything good will not help. We also need to fight. And who will be the leader? George Washington. So an army will be formed under George Washington. The colonies decided to fight for independence from British rule. So all the colonies came together, they formed a military and they decided to fight because requests did not have any effect on the British rule. So on 4th July 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. On 4th July, people declared themselves as independent. 4th July 1776, and this is the American Independence Day. It stated that the colonies had the right to free themselves from the oppressive British rule. So the Declaration of Independence stated that the colonists have their own right to free themselves from British rule, or the colonists had the right to fight for independence from the oppressive British rule. Formation of own government. The colonists asserted their right to form their own government. So we will break away from the British rule and we will form our own government. This was the view of the American colonies. Birth of the United States of America. So that led to the creation of United States of America. So victory in war. The war ended in 1781 with the defeat of the British forces by American colonists. In 1781, the colonies won against the British Empire. The British commander Cornwallis surrendered before George Washington. So the head of British army surrendered in front of the head of American army, which is George Washington. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. What was the Treaty of Paris? Recognition of independence. England recognized the independence of its 13 colonies through the treaty. So England recognized that Americans are independent people from now on. Means they accepted defeat from the Americans. The 13 colonies came to be known as United States of America. So these 13 colonies came together and formed USA, which is the United States of America. This marked the official birth of USA as an independent nation. Thus, the state of USA or the country of USA originated. The creation of USA was a major event in world history. So this is for the first time a democratic government is making a country, and that also a country which had got its independence by fighting with the most powerful empire, that is the British Empire. A symbol of freedom. It became a symbol of liberty and self rule. So it became a beacon of hope for the people who were fighting for independence. This set the foundation for democratic governance in the new country. So, thus, democratic principles became evident in the world for the first time. Result of the American War of Independence. Now, what was the result of American War of Independence? End of British rule. The war brought an end to the colonial British rule in America. So in America, Britishers did not have any power anymore. Formation of national government. In 1781, the 13 colonies united to form a national government. All the 13 colonies formed their own government. Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. A convention was called in Philadelphia to frame a new constitution. So new constitution was drafted in Philadelphia. The new constitution came into effect in 1789, establishing a republican form of government. So this was a new type of government for the first time in the world. George Washington in 1789, George Washington became the first president of USA. So George Washington, he was the head of the American army. He led the American people to victory. So he was the first president of USA. A federal and democratic government was introduced for the first time in the world. So for the first time, a democratic government was introduced in the world. Citizens were guaranteed freedom of speech, press, religion, and justice under the law. So citizens were guaranteed all kinds of personal freedom under this new government. The American Constitution served as a model for many countries, including India. Many of the aspects of Indian Constitution, like the fundamental rights, those have been taken from the American Constitution. Inspired Indian Constitution. Indians borrowed many features like the fundamental rights, federal system, and right to protest from the American Constitution. So that was all about the American War of Independence. Now we will go through the questions and their answers, which will help you a lot in your exams. So let's go through them one by one. Name some of the philosophers who spread democratic ideals in the 18th century. In the 18th century, philosophers like John Locke, Rousseau, Voltaire, Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine wrote about individual freedom, their rights against injustice, and the right to political independence. Their writings began to spread democratic ideas, which influenced political developments in America and France in the late 18th century. Who were Jefferson and Paine? How did they contribute to the American Revolution? Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were prominent American revolutionaries. They were greatly inspired by the ideas of European philosophers like Locke, Voltaire, and Rousseau. They believed that human beings had certain fundamental rights which no government could take away, and that the people had the right to disobey unjust authority. Thomas Jefferson asserted the colonists' right to rebellion and encouraged the desire for independence. He drew up the American Declaration of Independence, which stated that all men were equal and had the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Paine also expressed his thoughts forcefully for equality and overthrow of external power. Mention some of the matters in which British denied any freedom to the American colonists. The British denied the American colonists freedom in several economic and political matters. Some examples include colonists could only export goods like sugar, tobacco, cotton, indigo to England. Heavy duties were imposed on imported goods. Colonists were forbidden to start industries such as iron works, woolen goods, and textiles, so that the same industries in Britain did not face competition. The colonists had elected assemblies, but the governors were appointed by British government and were not responsible to the colonial assemblies. The governors governed in the interest of England, not the colonists. Give an account of the Boston Tea Party incident. What is the importance of this event? The Boston Tea Party was a protest by the American colonists against British taxation on tea. On 17 December 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Red Indians boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and threw many crates of tea into the sea. This act of defiance was in response to the British Parliament's decision to levy tax on tea despite withdrawing the stamp tax. This incident signified the anger of the people, and marked a turning point in the struggle for independence. It triggered the American War of Independence. What do you know about the Stamp Act of 1765? The Stamp Act was passed by the British Parliament in 1765. It imposed stamps taxes on all business transactions in America. The colonists strongly opposed the act as it added to their grievances. They believed it was unjust to be taxed without representation in the British Parliament. The slogan "No taxation without representation" became popular. The Americans boycotted British goods and protested violently, forcing the British Parliament to eventually withdraw the act. When was the Second Continental Congress held in Philadelphia? What was the outcome of it? The Second Continental Congress was held in 1775. At this Congress, the British colonists passed a resolution for the formation of an army under the leadership of George Washington and decided to fight for their independence. On 4th July 1776, the colonists announced the Declaration of Independence, which stated that the American colonists had the right to free themselves from the oppressive and exploitative British government and form their own government. What was the importance of the Treaty of Paris signed in 1783 between the British government and the colonists? The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783 between the British government and American colonists. It was significant because England recognized the independence of its 13 colonies. These colonies then came to be known as the United States of America, USA. The treaty marked the official end of British colonial rule in America and the birth of a new nation, which later became a powerful symbol of democracy and liberty. So that was all about the American War of Independence, which is also called as the American Revolution. Anyone interested in the topic uh, can go through the videos in this channel. It will help you to understand the topic better. And if you are a student of ICSE board, then this video has been tailored specifically for you. So please watch it properly again and again in order to understand this chapter better. The questions and their answers have been tailored according to the question writing pattern of ICSE board. Support me so that I can bring brighter contents in future. Thank you so much for your love and support.